Welcome to the Brazil Expat Journal, the BJ you can trust. My name's Phil and I'll be your guide as we talk about life in general here in South America's biggest country. This episode will travel to Salvador, Bahia, a Brazilian state as large as France and home to much of Brazil's Afro culture. My travel partner will be jazz singer and all-around great musician Alissa Sanders. She's an LA native who's made her home there since the mid-90s. She'll tell us about her first impressions and what made her stay. We'll also talk some Brazilian music and as always offer some tips for expats and travelers who want to get outside of their comfort zone and truly experience the depths of this country. Oh, and of course, we'll play the expat quiz. I hope you enjoy the program, but first, just a tiny bit of news. Today's news segment will be short because aside from yet another quarantine extension to the end of May here in Sao Paulo and more people protesting that extension, the political circus continues. What I do want to share is that the famous Virada Cultural, the world's largest 24-hour cultural festival, has not been canceled this year. It usually happens here in Sao Paulo sometime around May, but due to the quarantine, it was pushed to September. To get an idea of the scope of the Virada Cultural, which more or less translates to a cultural all-nighter, last year alone it gathered more than 5 million people, and it offers everything from classical music, film festivals, poetry readings, to live concerts and street DJs. And the events are spread throughout the city, so you can get a taste of the big crowds downtown and some quieter, intimate outings in the neighborhoods. One of my favorite editions was 2013 when George Clinton got everybody up and dancing. It was a hell of a night. And the best part about it, it's totally free. The date in September has yet to be defined, but stay tuned to this show to get more info about both the national and international acts who will be put on the schedule when it's finally announced. And as always, I want to thank everyone who listened to the last broadcast. I see I got a lot of new subscribers, so that makes me super happy. And if you're a first-time listener, then welcome aboard. The Brazil Expat Journal will be up every other week, and I'm super excited about some of the guests who have agreed to come on. We're going to touch on a lot of topics. To stay up to date on when new episodes premiere, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell wherever you may be listening to the Brazil Expat Journal. On YouTube, it's the little bell. And if you want to support my work, head on over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/PhilRay. Your contributions keep the wheels turning. Before we jump into the interview, here's a bit of Alissa on her Quarantine Sessions video project. She's singing the samba standard Preciso Me Encontrar, written by legendary sambista Mestre Candeia, and given as a gift to Cartola, another great Brazilian samba composer, for one of his 1970s LPs.
Quarantine Sessions with Julio Caldas, and this is Preciso Me Encontrar.
Deixa-me, preciso andar, vou por aí a procurar, rir pra não chorar. Deixa-me, preciso andar, vou por aí a procurar, sorrir pra não chorar. Quero assistir o sol nascer, ver as águas dos rios correr, ouvir os pássaros cantar. Quero nascer, quero viver, deixa-me, preciso andar, vou por aí a procurar, rir pra não chorar.
Hey there, Alissa. How are you?
I'm good, Phil. How are you? Phil
Good
in Brazil.
morning.
Good morning.
Alissa is one of the few people on this planet that can get me out of bed before 1 p.m.
I'm honored.
Yeah, and I'm without getting paid. I mean, if I'm getting paid, I'll get out of bed like 4 in the morning. But otherwise, so
Oh,
so guys, I'm so happy to have Alissa Sanders here with me today on the podcast. And I'll tell you specifically why, not just because I love her, obviously, but because if I am not mistaken, Alissa, you are the very, very first expat that I met when I came to Brazil. I'm almost certain. It might have
Mm.
been my friend Beverly, but I think I met her a little bit after you. But the funny
Okay.
thing about Alisa is that when I met her, I didn't think she was an expat because she's got the most perfect Portuguese you've ever heard in your life. And she's,
Thank you.
yes, and she speaks Portuguese with this real sweet Bahian accent. So in my mind, I said, "Oh, I'm meeting my first person from Bahia."
Fooled ya.
I know. So, and then I found out, oh, she's just an American, and I kicked her to the curb.
Just as I would have done.
But
Well done.
anyway, guys, so Alisa, as you heard in the intro, is a jazz singer here in Brazil, and she lives in Salvador. But I want to find out a little bit about your life before you came to Brazil, where you're
Try to
from,
remember.
and what did you do back in the big old USA?
Oh boy, let me try to remember back because I've been in Brazil a long time. I'm from Los Angeles, California, born and raised. Yes, there are people who are actually born and raised in Los Angeles, and we are not movie stars, nothing like them. Um, I went to university, high school, and then went to college at UC Berkeley in Northern California. Studied biology. I was on my way to be a doctor. And in the middle of that journey, I realized that I was not doctor material. All my friends were artists. And like I realized that wasn't my path, even though I really liked science. And I realized I needed to travel and see more of the world. I think my first time meeting people from other countries was in college, and I was really intrigued, especially the Black people that I met, because at that time in the 80s, like there just wasn't a lot of information about other Black people in the world. It was like the US and Africa's kind of like this blanket continent, you know? And I started meeting people from like Trinidad and Eritrea and like, you know, all these different places. And it just made me really curious about travel. I had always been interested in travel, but meeting other Black people from different countries made me think, wow, maybe there are different types of identities more than this kind of like, you know, very kind of singular, like, this is what it is to be a Black person in the US.
And,
Um,
and did this connection that you were having, did it merge into the artistic thing that you were starting to realize you were getting into at the same time?
Oh, I ran from my vocal abilities. I did not want to be a singer. I had a cousin who was a musician and a producer. He got so much, can I say shit on this?
Yes.
He got so much shit from the family. I was like, oh, hell no. And I was terrified of singing on stage. I was terrified of people hearing me sing. Like I would literally sing in the shower, close my door, sing in my room, and I didn't want anyone to hear me. I just sang because I loved it, because I felt good, because it was my therapy. So that's, yeah. So anyway, I started traveling and I moved to Alaska right after, like the day after I graduated, and I was there for 4 months. I worked as a park ranger.
Oh
And then it
God.
was, yeah.
I never knew that about you. You went to Alaska.
Went to
Wait, so
Alaska.
so you meet a bunch of Black people and then you go to Alaska?
I know. Well, you know what? I just needed to get out and I needed to get a job. So I got a job with the National Park Service. And that was as far away as I could get, you know, because
Okay, I
National
got you.
Park Service had to be in the US. I just wanted to leave, like
Hmm.
California. And so I was there for 4 months in the summer, of course, and met more people. You know, some people, I think we had some foreign people, but people from all over that just had such different lifestyles and ideas and experiences that I just wanted to keep traveling. So after that, I went to the Caribbean because the Virgin Islands is part of the US and there's a national park there. So I worked in the Virgin Islands National Park for 9 months as a lifeguard. And that was my first experience in a Black culture that was not African American culture. And I loved it. And I think there I learned what really served me in Brazil, which is don't go to places and be an American. Like don't don't go to a foreign country and expect people to speak the same way, expect them to have the same habits, the same customs. just don't do that to yourself and don't do that to them. Like the expat community there, which for the most part was not African Americans, really kind of distanced themselves from the local people and even referred to them as locals, but in a derogatory way. And so I kind of intuitively was like, okay, if I don't say anything, I look like a local. Let me just kind of not talk too much and try to slip into that world, because I want to experience what's their experience. I don't want to experience being an expat here and trying to recreate the United States in a tropical place. So I was just very humble and just went into things like, yeah, I'm American, but I want to learn about your culture. And I just had such a different experience than so many of the expats there. I ended up working on a radio station there. And that was really fun because I loved music and I had a chance to DJ and played some Brazilian music.
Let me stop you for a second. And when was this exactly? Like, this is after university?
This was 1993, so after
Yeah.
Alaska, I spent a year traveling. So I went to the Virgin Islands in '93, and I loved it there. And I decided from there to travel more. So after 9 months, I left. And I wanted to be in more places where I wanted to go south. I wanted to be more places with Black people, with people of color. I didn't want to go to places that were like American in nature or European. So I went to Venezuela because I had a friend there and I was supposed to stay with him. But as it turns out, he didn't. Actually, we were going to travel together to Venezuela. He, like a week before, backed out. So I went by myself, knew nobody. And I was staying with a friend of a friend. And I thought, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to come here as an American. I'm just going to kind of see if I can blend in. There aren't that many Black people in Venezuela, but there are a few. And people never assumed I was American because back in '93, the idea of American was what you saw in media. So it was very white, very European. We just had the Cosby Show back then. There was not that much Black media. So I was like, great, I'm going to not be American. And so I just wouldn't say I was American unless people asked me. And everyone who didn't speak Spanish spoke English because English was kind of this, like the lingua franca, like that was the default language if you didn't know the local language. And so I ended up traveling around, meeting other travelers from all around the world. And I loved it, and I almost stayed because the people that I ended up staying with wanted me to move in, and they were going to get me help teaching English, and I was going to become one of their roommates. And then I remembered when I was there, I said, there's Brazil, we're right next to Brazil, right? Well, let me just hop over to Brazil, because when I was in my teens, I remembered reading about Boa Morte, which is it's a sisterhood in Bahia, and it was the first thing I'd seen about Black people who weren't African, and it showed these Black matriarchs and this beautiful ceremony they had. And I was like, let me just hop over there and check that out. And then I'll come back and decide if I want to live in Venezuela. So I did that. But as you know, Brazil's huge. So
Yeah, where to go in Brazil?
Right? Well, I knew I wanted to go to Bahia, but I didn't realize how big Brazil was. And I had gotten the cheapest ticket on the cheapest airline ever. It was like 30-year-old Russian jets. But we made it alive to Manaus. And then from Manaus, I got to Belém and then realized, oh, wow, I'm still really far from Bahia. How am I going to get there? And I took a bus. And I knew no Portuguese. And in Brazil, there are a lot of Black people. So everyone just thought I was Brazilian. And no one knew I didn't understand Portuguese. So I had some really interesting experiences traveling while looking Brazilian without speaking the language.
How long is that bus ride from Pará to Bahia?
33 hours.
How many?
33 hours.
Oh, God.
And so I couldn't talk to anyone. And I literally I was like, all right, so I've got to eat. What can I say? I knew some Spanish, but obviously, there's some things that aren't the same. So Coca-Cola, everyone knew. I think I started off saying pollo, but then I'd flap my wings. People would kind of knew what that meant. And like beef was I just put my fingers up on my forehead and like horns.
Oh, God.
And, people understood me. And then when the bus got to Salvador, I remember them opening the door of the bus in the rodoviária, the bus station, and the smell that hit me was familiar. And it was so strange, Phil, because obviously I'd never been to this place, but to have this smell, this familiar smell come, and smell is it's like one of our first senses to develop. It's a very ancient sense, and it brings up memories. Like it's very connected to emotion and memories. And I was going through my memory bank trying to figure, well, what smell does this smell like? Because I've never been here. And to me, it was like it activated some sort of ancestral remembrance, some sort of ancestral memory or connection to Bahia that went beyond like kind of logic. And I was in Salvador for 2 months. For the first month, I really couldn't speak to people. So I was walking around kind of like this invisible person who looked, I didn't draw any attention. I looked like everyone else, but I couldn't connect to people. And I thought, well, maybe I made a mistake coming here. How am I because no one spoke English back in 93. Like it was very rare. And then I had my Lonely Planet. And I just decided, you know what, let me just go do a tour. Let me go to a travel agency. And I called this one that he specialized in Afro-Brazilian tours. His name is Connor O'Sullivan. He has this travel agency until today. It's called Tattoo Turismo. And I called and I said, can I book a tour with you? I've been here for like a month and I can't get around. I haven't met anyone. Like I'm getting depressed. He's like, sure, come on over. I'll book some tours. And Salvador, you've been here, right?
Let me ask you before you go on. Where were you staying during this whole time?
I stayed in Graça in this was before Airbnb. So it was like some little posada
This was before internet. Come on.
This was before internet, yeah. Yeah, this was like Lonely Planet was the thing. So like I had found a posada, which is an inn in Lonely Planet. But the guy there was really creepy. He was this older guy that kept trying to like touch the women who was there. It was like, oh no, I'm not staying here. One of us will die. This is not working. And so I called the agency and he was like, yeah, come on down. And he had said, you probably want to move to a hostel. This was back in the day of youth hostels were the thing. It's like, because you'll meet other travelers there. It'll be a little easier. So he told me to come to the office. But the thing is in Salvador's a really old city. Salvador's like 450 years old. It was not made for cars or buses. It's not logical. It just kind of like, was a little village and then expanded and then expanded. And the culture here is like, you can give an address, but that address is meaningless if you don't give points of reference, because that's how everyone navigates here. It's like, when people are coming to my house, I have to say, okay, you have to go past the church, go past Dorival Caymmi and the mermaid at the corner of Caymmi and the Orla, and then go past the Catholic church and then turn left when you see the little strip mall and go to the end, and then it's the street past Coelba, which is the electric company. You have to give this whole explanation, which, by the way, when I went to Africa, when I went to Ethiopia, it's the same thing there. So I don't know if this is an African thing that got carried over. But that's all well and good if you speak Portuguese. If you don't speak Portuguese, you cannot find anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely lost.
I was totally lost, and this guy had given me points of reference, but I didn't know what they were, and I couldn't ask people. And it started raining, so I'm just circling. As it turned out, I was circling his office, but I couldn't figure out how to get to it because there was some trick to like crossing this drainage canal to get, and I just couldn't figure. So I circled for like 2 hours, and then there were no cell phones. You had to find a payphone, and you had to have a ficha, which was like a little coin-looking thing. And half the time you put in your ficha, and it just eat it because it was broken. And I literally was on the street crying. Like,
oh God!
I cannot get it. And so finally, I got a phone, and it worked. And I called him, and I'm like, I have no idea. He's like, all right, I'm going to come find, I don't remember how it happened, but I ended up getting there. And it's funny, he tells the story to this day. This has been like 26 years ago. He said, you showed up at the office. You looked like some like sort of wet puppy. You just were so sad and pathetic. were like drenched. And you just look completely defeated. He's like, I knew I had to help you.
Like, why did I come here? Oh, I guess I'll stay. 25
So
years later.
he was my first friend, and through him things started opening up, because back in that day you kind of had to enter into the tourist circuit, because if you didn't speak the language you weren't going to be let in. And so I met Pete. He took me to he literally like put me in his car, took me to the hostel, got me a room, took me to the other place, got my stuff, checked me out, checked me in there, and then I did 2 tours with him and got to see some of the countryside, the Recôncavo, start to understand some of the history of Brazil, and particularly of Salvador, started meeting people through the hostel. And there were other Brazilians in the hostel as well. And through them connecting to other networks and starting to meet other people here in Salvador and going around the city and starting to feel more comfortable. And so that's when it opened up to me. And then through Connor's networks of friends, he would invite me to things as well. And I started getting a little bit more courageous and taking the bus and just realizing, okay, I'm just going to get lost. So let me just get on this bus and go to the end of the line and stay on the bus and then come back. At least I'll get to see some of the city. So I would do that.
I got you. And
So in
let me ask you real quick, because you mentioned the smells, like that gave you this immediate connection when you got to Salvador. Can you also tell me about other first impressions that you got of the city, like as soon as you got there, your very first impressions?
uh, I love the sea. I love that the sea was present everywhere. I loved seeing like donkeys and horses walking around. I was from LA, and even in the Caribbean, like I was in St. Thomas, which is very urban. You wouldn't see really horses walking around other parts of the island. But to be in a capital city and like see horses, like if you went into the periferia, people ride horses, or there'd just be random donkeys, dirt roads. It seemed like another time. And to be in a place where I was in the majority, which I'd gotten a little bit of in the Caribbean, but here, it's a city of 3.5 million people, and everyone looked like me, and I just perfectly blended in. They
Yeah.
just all thought I was stupid because I couldn't speak, but
No.
that for an African American who, Los Angeles has a pretty small Black population, and at university there were, I think, 5%. So to be in a place where I was in the majority was incredibly empowering, and it just felt good. It's like a part of you relaxes for the first time. And you don't realize that, because the tension that you hold is normal, and you get to some place where you fit in everywhere, and it's like you breathe for the
Yeah, you
first
finally
time.
get to be yourself. And for those that
Yeah.
don't know much about Brazil, because obviously this podcast is going out for people who are thinking about coming to Brazil. Bahia is like the Afro nucleus of Brazil. It's where the majority of blacks are, and the most of the Afro culture that is part of Brazilian popular culture today comes from Bahia. I always like to compare Bahia. It's like the New Orleans of Brazil, where like it's the nucleus. It's where the blues and jazz and everything starts over there. And Bahia, for me, feels like the nucleus for Afro culture, musically and culturally, for the rest of the country. So, especially for Black travelers, I think it's a really interesting place to go. So I can understand how that would make you feel. And you talked about your language struggles and flapping your wings, doing the funky chicken, getting
Yep.
down.
You're gonna feel, you gotta be okay with feeling ridiculous if you're gonna move to Brazil. Like
Yes,
you're
definitely.
just gonna have to be ridiculous.
But when did you start to slowly but surely learn the language?
All right, so I went back to the States. I was just here for 2 months, which was not really enough time to learn. So I went back to the U.S. and I started trying to surround myself with Brazilian things. So I started dancing with a Brazilian group in where was I? San Francisco. so that I could hear the language. I listened to a lot of music. I bought CDs and tapes. It was tapes back then. And I would listen. I would listen to Rosa Passos. I would listen to João Gilberto and sing along. And that, I think, helped with just hearing the sounds and my mouth getting used to making the sounds. I came back in 95 as part of, there was a group, activist group in San Francisco called Global, I forgot, but we came down here on a trip in 95. So I was here for about 10 days and got to hear the language more. I think the thing is hearing it. You've got to hear a language before you start speaking. And then when I came back from the trip, I knew that I wanted to come and live for a little bit in Brazil. So I started taking lessons with a Baiana named Maggie Nascimento. And I wanted to take lessons with someone from Bahia. And so I started with her. I think I worked with her for about 9 months. I think I did classes 2 or 3 days a week. And still with the dance troupe and still listening to music and just trying to immerse myself as much as was possible in the US. And then when I got here, I realized that I still didn't understand anyone because no one speaks the way, people don't speak properly, even in the US. So it's good to study before you leave because it does give you a base. Like it helped me be able to read things, which is helpful if you're on your own, because, you were looking for a store and I could kind of read some basic things, like farmácia or, but in terms of like speaking, I could speak, but I couldn't understand people's responses so much because they would speak faster than the teacher did, and they would pronounce things differently.
Well, Alisa is being kind because for you guys that don't get a little bit of Brazilian, the size of Brazil, very big country, just that it goes north south, and there are regional accents, and the accent from Bahia has got to be up there with one of the more challenging ones. Okay, so she's being very kind as far as not understanding people. And it would be as if I'm learning English for the first time and then they put me in, like, I don't know, Louisiana or,
Yeah.
South Carolina and say, okay, good luck, trying to
Right.
understand
Yeah.
this type of English. So it's not even a Portuguese that you would hear. I don't think it's even in a lot of movies. I think in movies they use more the Carioca, which is the Rio accent, or even the Sao Paulo accent, which is
Right.
quote unquote the more neutral accent. It would be like the New York, LA accent that people are probably used to. So she's down there in Bahia trying to understand this very kind of, like what we would describe as a southern drawl, but from Bahia, which I love, by the way. I think the Bahia accent has got to be one of my favorite accents because it's so sing-songy.
Exactly.
But
and
good
that
luck
helps.
understanding
That
it.
really helps. Yeah, well, that's funny because it's very musical, and this was something that as a singer, I just heard the melodies. I couldn't distinguish words at first. I don't know if maybe someone whose brain isn't wired that way would have had an easier time, but to me, it was like everyone was singing, and so I would just catch on the melodies, which I think is why my accent was good because I heard the intonations and the melodic nature of. The accent was easy for me to copy.
I got you. Now, going back, because did you skip when did you get into music, or were you not into music yet? Or is it something that happened before or after? I'm sorry.
Becoming a professional singer happened once I was in Brazil. I
Okay.
was kind of running and hiding from music my whole life because I just had decided I'm not going to be a singer. I don't want to be poor and be, addicted to drugs or alcohol. I had a really negative idea of what it would mean to be a professional musician. And I just love singing. So I sang in a choir when I was in elementary school. I sang in a choral group, like a classical choral group in college. And then I just sing in my room. But what happened when I was here, so I moved back to Brazil, or I moved to Brazil in 96. I was visited, what I was talking about before was 93. So I moved here in 96, which was, I was supposed to stay 3 months. And then I stayed another 3 months and then I didn't leave. So prepare people, like, anyway. Um, in 98, I was going through a crisis, which I think that can often happen if you move somewhere alone. I don't know how many people move here alone. I think a lot of people come like, in couples or boyfriends, but moving to a new place alone, especially I was in my mid 20s, you're still growing up. And so, I was going through some inner crises around, who I was and who I wanted to be. And I'm in this place that's totally different from how I was raised. And so I turned to music just kind of instinctively during that time. And a friend of mine was like, you should just take lessons. And I thought, maybe I will, because maybe that'll be kind of like therapy for me. And so she gave me the number of her teacher, he was, really well known and well respected. He's worked with Gilberto Gil, Margarete Menezes, Ivete Sangalo, who are some of the biggest names of music here in Bahia. And I thought, well, why not? So I called him and he said, yeah, come and do an audition, because I don't work with everyone, so come. And so I went, and I never sang in front of people. And so I asked him if he would leave the room, which I'm like in his house. I'm like, I can't sing in front of you. Can you leave the room? So he went to the doorway, and I sang a song. It was a jazz standard, because that's what I love to sing. And he came back in the room. He was very serious, very serious face, and he's just kind of quiet. And he's looking at me, and he's like, so, I don't really need any more students. I have enough students. I'm not looking to get business. I'm doing fine. But every once in a while, someone comes in, and that person is meant to be a singer, and I have to tell them. And he's like, you are meant to sing. You were born a singer. It's like, if you want to work with me, we can, let me know what your goals are, but I can help you with technique and things that will help you be less nervous singing in front of people. And I was like, okay, and so I started working with him 2 days a week. And some classes I just come to and cry. It was really crazy. It was like this really cathartic experience, learning to kind of liberate my voice. And he also, in the classes where I'd just start crying and we couldn't sing anymore, he would be like, okay, so we're going to have music listening day. And so he shared Elis Regina with me, Monica Salmazo. I learned so much about Gal Costa. I learned a lot about Brazilian music through him, because he shared, singers that he felt was important that I know. And so yeah, it was really beautiful. He's my friend to this day.
Well, that's cool. Because that's cool that you went into that, because I was gonna ask you what made you fall in love with Brazilian music. It seems like you already had some Brazilian music with you before, but I don't know if this kind of even exploded even more the Brazilian music experience.
I think it exploded more because the Brazilian music that I knew from before were the Brazilians that leave. So, like João Gilberto he's well known here too, but he's very well known internationally. Gilberto Gil and Caetano are known internationally. Olodum is known internationally. But there are Brazilian artists that, for instance, Monica Salmazo, I don't know that she's that well known outside of Brazil. Elis Regina's she's kind of known outside of Brazil, but she's like a superstar. She's like the Barbara Streisand of Brazil, Mm-hmm. So there were Brazilian artists that I think only a Brazilian and a Brazilian musician could have introduced me to. Novos Baianos, for instance. Like no one knows who they are outside of Brazil. Rita Lee, Mm-hmm. So that was invaluable to learn that from a Brazilian musician, and then someone who could help teach me how to sing them.
At the
and
time,
through that, I learned more of the language.
Okay, yeah, because I was gonna ask if at that time you already understood some of what they were saying in the music.
I understood most of what they were saying, and when I didn't, I would just, it was words. So I would acquire vocabulary. What I started to understand from music was like the use of the language beyond colloquial, beyond like just street language, because Brazilian composers are poets. Chico
Yes.
Buarque, Gil. I mean, it's just like you can't even translate it. It's such. It's like Yeats or like I don't even know that many American poets, but like it's a really high level of poetry that really teaches you a lot about the Brazilian psyche and the Brazilian way of looking at life. Like Caetano's references, like his metaphors. Like there's this one song from where he talks about o rio sempre deságua no mar. The water, in English it would be the water always runs to the sea, but literally deságua is to to give your water to pour your water into something.
Yeah.
You know, the use of that word and talking about, he was talking about his feelings about something. And it's just like to start to understand that level of the Brazilian psyche, the Brazilian way of feeling about love, you know, which is something I think you can find in music in the 40s in Brazil, Cole Porter, but that's something that I don't think we let ourselves be that vulnerable in the States anymore. I don't think we let ourselves feel love that deeply, you know, like I don't know, I can't think offhand, but just so many amazing songs that really taught me a lot about the Brazilian soul.
Yeah, no, I agree with you because when I first started getting into Brazilian music it was around the same time as you, maybe 96, 97. I was still in the US.
Mm.
Um, that was the thing that struck me was the poetic nature of it. And of course, I grew up in a Brazilian household, so I could understand a whole lot more of it. But when I
Mm-hmm.
actually sat down with those big vinyl records and actually read the lyrics, and then I started to
Mm.
translate as much as I could the Portuguese into English to send as love poems. And
Nice.
this girl that I was dating at the time, she was like, "Oh my God, this is so different." I was like, "Yeah, man. I mean, it opened up this whole other world, and I don't think people realize how. I mean, it would be like, okay, I'm reading Nicky Giovanni, I'm reading Robert Frost, and I'm reading Caetano Veloso. Like it would be that
Right.
level. There's put them right next to
Yeah.
Walt Whitman. You know, as
Absolutely.
far as the
Absolutely.
level of poetry. And in
Yeah.
fact, oh, I'll try to link it in the comments, but there's a great Brazilian movie. You've probably seen this movie, Alisa. I think it's called Palavra Encantada, Enchanted Word,
No, I haven't.
and it's about the history of poetry in Brazilian music, starting way
Ooh.
back in the 1920s, all the way up to Racionais, the Racionais,
Wow.
which is a great hip hop group. Um, I saw it here when I first got to Brazil. A friend of mine took me to see this documentary, and it's beautiful. And it's got a lot of the great, Chico Buarque's in there, Gil,
Hmm.
and they just talk about, hey, it's no joke. Like it's literally that's what we're trying to do. We are bringing the poetic, like hardcore poetry, and putting it in these songs. So it's a good one if you want to check out. I'll link it in the comments.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I do want to see it.
So
Can I just read something from Villa Lobos? I mean,
go ahead.
I never talk to people about I never talked to someone who was raised in American culture about this thing of the poetry and the music. So I'm just digging this. But there's a song by Villa Lobos. If you're listening, check this out. It's amazing. Villa Lobos is absolutely essential listen for anyone who loves Brazilian music. And it's called Melodia Sentimental. Just so you get an idea of this is how Brazilians speak about love. So, acorda, vem ver a lua, que dorme na noite escura, que fulge tão bela e branca, derramando doçura, clara chama silente, ardendo meu sonhar. I mean, so they would be like, help me with this. Wake up, come see the moon that sleeps in this dark night. Fulge is de fugir?
Fujas, yeah.
Fulges. That, no, but that doesn't work. Fulge, is that
What's the phrase?
shines?
What's the phrase?
E
The
fulge tão bela e branca.
Kifuja?
Fulge. Fulge.
Fulg.
Ge. Fulge. It must be something like shines.
Yeah.
That shines so beautiful and white. Melting sweetness.
Yes, Fuja is to shine. Yeah, Fuja.
Oh, see how much people
Yeah.
listen to music if you want to come here because you'll get vocabulary.
Yes.
That shines so beautiful and white. Derramando doçura. So like derramando is like to melt, like to dripping kind of
Yeah,
melt.
dripping sweetness. Mm.
Clara chama silente. A bright silent flame burning my dreams. Like we don't say
Yeah,
that.
he's got it bad.
It's just like
That's
good
how we would write. We
God.
would write a song just like, I got it bad, I got it bad.
Exactly. That's basically what he's saying, but oh
Yeah,
man.
there's a lot of poetry in the music, and um, uh, it's good that you brought this up because next I want to get into a little bit of what was this a challenge for you when you start getting into actually singing this? Because obviously,
Woo.
um, it's a very different vocabulary, many more words, different melodic structure. So, what became the biggest challenges for you when you finally said, you know what, I want to try a few of these songs and see how it works out?
Oh, the thing is, if you're a singer, you want to sing the things that move you. So it wasn't. I mean, yeah, I had to learn how to pronounce things, but I wanted to do it. Like these songs, I was already singing them at home. Like if I love a song, I don't care. Like I love Idan Rachel. I don't speak Hebrew. I just do embromation. I just try to make the same sounds. I don't know what I'm saying, but it's just something that's natural to musicians. You know, if we hear music, we want to repeat it. We want to, it's almost like this, you want to bring it into you
This
by
is
singing or
true.
by playing it. And
Um,
so, yeah, you know this. So it was just, you know, I had Brazilian teachers, so I would go to them on pronunciation. And I'm a Virgo, so I would just, you know, and I have a good ear. Just keep trying. There are times when I screwed up and screwed up big on stage, and I mean it's pretty funny. I remember a time, I think this is when I was at Walter Mancini. So there were just like in English, how you'll notice foreign speakers they'll say shit for sheet
mhm.
in the US, or like, you know, that's pretty common. So there are words that will do that in Portuguese too, like fugir e see, I'm gonna like fugir
Mm-hmm.
and like to foder,
Fuji.
fugir. See,
Fuji.
I can barely hear the difference, like even now. And so in the song, it was fugir, which fugir is to escape.
Yeah, run away for something. So
And the
instead, you're
difference
saying
is like that D in the middle. And I pronounced it wrong, and it became the other, which is Fuji.
Fuji, Fuji. Então, eu
Fuji.
fugi. So you fucked somebody, basically.
Exactly. Instead of escaping, I fucked somebody. And it's fun, and get used to this too. When you come here, you won't know when you make a mistake until you see the reaction on people's faces.
Uh-huh.
And then you know, uh-oh, I pronounced something wrong.
Oh, that's funny. See, I hadn't
Yeah.
heard anything like that before. But you could always kind of, now if you fuck up, you can say, eu fugi e fugir. Like, I fucked, and then I was like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. Eu fugi e fugir.
Make a song with those two words, just like
Yes.
get it out of the way.
No, I
So,
mean, you
I
gotta
don't know if
run
that
away
helps.
from the bad sex. So, you know, it would make sense. And what does singing in Portuguese bring out of you as a musician that's different than singing in English? Not just technically, but on a spiritual, human level. But both sides. What does singing in Portuguese bring out of you?
I don't think it's necessarily singing in Portuguese, but I think that it's just, you know, with any song as an interpreter, because I don't sing my own songs yet.
Hmm.
You're wanting to bring through the emotion or tell the story that that person is telling. So when I sing in Portuguese, because I understand the language, it's just, I mean, it's easier still to sing in English, but it's, you know, I'm telling the story, so I'm feeling, if I'm doing it right, I'm feeling what the composer is trying to transmit in the song. Um, I have to think a little more, precisely for, you know, this last example. If I slip up on a sound, it could change a word, which in English I wouldn't do because that's my mother tongue. But in Portuguese, I have to stay a little bit more connected to make sure I'm pronouncing correctly. And also, like with the words, like in an English song, if you forget a word, like, I don't know, some random word like fly me to the moon, let's say, fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. If you forget play, your brain will automatically find another word like fly me to the moon and let me live among the stars, and that works in the
Hmm.
context.
Hmm.
In Portuguese, that's a little harder for me. So if I forget a random word, which sometimes will happen, then I can't really substitute another word, and then it's kind of like you're running and you kind of trip, and it's like, whoa, wait, wait, wait! You try to keep your balance. So I have to stay a little bit more attent when I'm singing in Portuguese. But emotional wise, I mean, if I love a song, I'm thankful that I can sing some of these great composers in the original language, because every once in a while someone will ask me, well, can you sing it in English? And I'll say no, because it's not the same song. And you know this, but most people probably don't. When songs get translated, it's not word for word, because they're things that of the culture and concepts and ideas and experiences that don't translate, like Manhã do Carnaval, which in English is day in the life of a fool.
Hmm.
In Portuguese, it's the morning of Carnival, and they're talking about this guy. The morning of Carnival, he's waking up and he wants to, you know, talking about what he sees in his lover's eyes. And but I don't know if she had died at this point anyway. But he's talking about waking up and seeing the love in her eyes and the kiss on her lips. Well, in the US, we don't have a reference for Carnival. Mardi Gras is the closest thing, but not everyone has that reference. So they completely changed the song. And this happens with a lot of music that's
Yes.
translated from Portuguese to English. So I prefer to sing Brazilian music in Portuguese because I am able to transmit that story and the emotions that the original composer wanted to share, versus a version that someone tried to, you know, you can't even call it a translation, it's a version, an American version of that experience, but it's often not the same.
Yeah, and when they try to be the same, I don't think it works. And I'll give you an example. Let's see if you agree with me. Água de Março, which I think is one of the most beautiful Brazilian songs
Mm.
lyrically.
Hmm.
But if you do the English version of it, they actually try to really almost do a literal translation, and something
Yeah.
about just saying a rock, a piece of wood, like it just has no poetry in English, you know, and they just did a very literal translation of this song. Whereas in the Portuguese, there's a poetry to it because you realize there's a lot of poor people, there's a lot of this rural lifestyle in Brazil. So her just singing, just rattling off all these things that she sees, a piece of wood, a rock, the morning bread, and all these things, it's beautiful. Like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It's a beautiful
Wow.
song. But in English, it's like, what are you talking about? Rocks?
Right. It's like, yeah,
Throw some
random.
rocks at you.
And just the sound of the pau, pedra, there's a melodic poetry happening there. É
Yes, the
pão, é pedra,
consonants.
é
Yeah.
fim do caminho, that we don't have in English. Like,
Yes.
because I feel like there's more vowels in Portuguese. I mean, I know there's five,
Yes.
but I feel like the words have more vowels. Like even the endings of most words is either a vowel or it's a consonant that becomes like a vowel, like the L's at the end become like a ooh, you know? So there's just
There's way more vowel
finding different.
sounds.
Yeah.
And actually, for those of you who go onto the Patreon channel that I will have a few like Portuguese language tips, and one of them, one of these that are going to be on there, is about listening to the vowels in Portuguese, because there's way more vowel sounds in Portuguese than in English, and I think that'll get your pronunciation better if you realize that right from the start. You really have to open your mouth and really, kind of pronounce all those vowels. Alisa, I tried to play Scrabble in Portuguese once with an English Scrabble board, and we ran out of letters. We ran out of
Oh,
tiles. Yeah,
wow.
it just
See?
there's the words just have way more vowel sounds in them in Portuguese than in English, and it in all of this adds to how they write. So where they find the rhyme schemes and
Mm-hmm.
the the consonants, the assonants, all this stuff, it's just built differently than it is in
Yeah.
English. So it
Yeah.
doesn't always work. I'm with you. I prefer. There's a few exceptions. There's a few English versions of Brazilian songs that I like, but it's maybe two or three. But for the most
Which
part,
one?
I
Which ones?
like Wave. I like the English version of Wave. I think it's really
Wave
fun.
works.
Yeah, I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
real fun one. And sort of Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars I dig. It's not I don't like it as much as
Yeah.
Corcovado, but I think it's pretty in English too. I think it's a really pretty
Mm-hmm.
version. But for the
Yeah, I
most
do.
part,
Like that too.
nah.
Girl from Ipanema works in English too.
Well, that's a classic. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a classic.
Yeah.
I think the best um, album is Frank Sinatra singing Jobim. Those are the
Hmm.
versions that more or less work. Like whatever he's
Okay.
singing on there, those are the ones. But even then, like Meditation, I don't like the English version of Meditation. Portuguese is way better than the English version, but it's tough to translate. You
Nada
can't.
será como antes is a good one too. Nothing will be as it was.
There's an English version of that. That's Milton, right?
Yeah,
Oh, I never
that one's
knew
nice.
that.
Sarah Vaughan, best version.
I gotta check it out. I
It's
gotta
very.
check it out. But anyhow, oh, Sarah Vaughan. No, we need. We're gonna. I'm gonna have Alisa back on, and we're gonna go heavy duty into Brazilian music because you just mentioned Sarah Vaughan, and Sarah Vaughan has so many beautiful versions of Brazilian songs, and she's worked with Milton Nascimento too.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys don't know, Milton, he's God, but okay,
Yes.
aside from being God, he is, for me, the epitome of everything that is wonderful and beautiful and perfect about Brazilian music. And he's worked with a lot of American artists who probably thought the same thing. He's like the epitome of everything that's good and wonderful and great about music in general.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely he's did some stuff with Sarah Vaughan later in her career. But let's get back to Alisa here, because oh my goodness, I gotta refocus the interview because you get me talking
I know.
about music. We'll be here
I
all
went off
day.
on tangents, right?
Yes.
I
Um,
don't think I'm answering your questions directly either.
no, it's fine. It's fine.
Bad interview.
But I want
Bad.
to look. I want to get us back into Salvador. Okay, so
Okay.
Brazilian music obviously is very important part of your life. But for me, an important part of your life is the fact that you are in Salvador. I met Alisa when she was in Sao Paulo and miserable.
Was it obvious?
Yes, because Sao Paulo is the best city in Brazil. Um, and so, getting back to what kept you in Salvador, because you've lived in other places in Brazil. Any place other than Sao Paulo, or no, just Sao
Nope,
Paulo?
just Sao Paulo, yeah.
Just Sao Paulo. When exactly did you start living like, okay, I'm officially now an expat, like living in Brazil? When was that? Just so we get the timeline right.
96.
96. So you've been here, you'd say, office, obviously, you go home and visit every once in a while, but like Brazil is your second home, quote unquote, since 96. And what made you move to Sao Paulo for that short period?
So I'll go back into career. One of my various stints was I worked as a flight attendant for American Airlines, and it was kind of on a what do you call it? Like not a dare, But I had a friend that started working for United, and she's like, "Oh, you should apply to be a flight attendant because then you could still live in Brazil, but you could, go to see your parents more and fly around more." And
I
it's like,
think
okay,
I,
I'll try. And I applied for American Airlines, and it turned out they needed Portuguese speakers. So
I think I
I
remember
will.
this. I had
Yeah, I think
forgotten.
when we met, I might have still been flying.
Yeah, I think so.
And so I was hired in 2000 with American Airlines and based out of New York, and I flew New York to Sao Paulo, Guarulhos. So it made more sense to live in Sao Paulo because I was doing those trips. So I relocated to Sao Paulo and was in Sao Paulo for about 12 years, I think.
Oh God.
12, 14 years, yeah. And flying part of that time. And then I actually started singing professionally in Sao Paulo. So was that your question? No, you asked about how I got to Sao Paulo. Why Sao
No,
Paulo?
that's fine. That's great because it kind of connects to something I was gonna ask you, which what were the challenges of being a musician in Brazil. And I imagine that the only silver lining about São Paulo is that maybe there's easier work. I don't know.
Definitely, definitely. Um, I started singing professionally while I was still flying, so I had an income. And then when I left flying was when and this is just like this has just been a magical journey, and that's why people are like, "Why'd you become a singer?" And I say, you know what? I think it was my destiny because the things that happen are not things that happen every day to musicians. I was invited to sing at like probably the most renowned piano club and piano bar in Sao Paulo, which is Barreto at the Fazano Hotel, which is a whole other story of how that happened. But at the point that that happened, I had something stable to walk into. So I started doing that. And then I had a side gig that was not really legal. So I mean, it wasn't illegal, but let's say I would help musicians get the equipment that they needed,
Okay. You're
and
not you're
they
not an
would
arms dealer, are you?
not an arms dealer.
Okay.
I was helping musicians get the equipment that they needed, and then they would pay me for that. Nothing stolen, things purchased. Just let's call it uh, clandestine import export
Mm-hmm.
business. So that together with singing at the piano bar, I was okay until Brazil's inflation started rising. The good thing about Sao Paulo is it's huge. There's 20 million people, and I sing jazz, which is more, unfortunately, an elitist, or maybe fortunately, more of a kind of elitist kind of music. Even in the US, but even more so when you leave the US.
Mm-hmm.
And so that meant people actually would pay and pay pretty well. So I sang at the Fazano, and that was like a regular salary. And then I did events. And for most musicians, they're not living off of what they make in the bar. It's events that are going to pay. And then in 2013, I met some people that were, I guess you would call them booking agents in English. And so they started booking festivals and higher level events for me. And so I was able to live off of just singing for quite a while. So yeah, till about
But
2014.
and what took you back to Salvador?
I had an unfortunate series of turn of events in 2014, where I ended up. There was already starting to be the recession, so I was getting fewer gigs. I had to leave one of the places that I was singing, where I was getting a regular salary. Was going through a really deep depression as well. And so with like music stuff falling off, I ended up getting some translation work. And then immediately after that, I got really ill. I won't go into details, but to the point where I was so debilitated that I couldn't really work anymore. And I ended up having to fly back to the US to stay with my mom. And in the process, I had to give up the apartment that I had just moved into. So there was a huge, apartments are really expensive in Brazil. You should know that. Well, if you have dollars or euros, it won't be expensive. But if you're earning reais, it's like sometimes half of your salary goes to rent, and you have to pay huge deposits, like 3 months rent deposit. And so since I broke the contract, I lost that, and I had to pay to move myself. It was just like everything, this domino effect, everything fell apart. And so I couldn't maintain a life in Sao Paulo, so I gave up my apartment. I quit my translating job. I moved back to LA because I had to have surgery. And in this process, I get a call from a school in Bahia that's like, would you like to come here and teach? And I'm like, when? And they're like, yeah, we need English teachers, and such and such person told us about you, and we really want a native speaker. And I had taught when I was in Salvador from 96 to 2000. And I said, look, I don't have a teaching credential. That's okay. Just come. Our reference said you're a great teacher. Can you be here by X date? And I was calculating like how much time I need to recover from surgery. And I was like, okay. Because I didn't have a job in LA. I didn't want to just live with my mom. And I was like, all right, now I just need a place to stay that's like cheap or free. And a friend of mine's like, hey, I have a house that I rent, and the lady that's renting the house, she's looking for someone to share. Do you want to share? So it was just like, and Bahia has been this for me. And this is why I feel like I have a very strong ancestral connection to this place. When I'm meant to be here, it opens up everything that I need to be here, because within a month I had a job and I had a place to stay. Nice. So it was like, okay, well, I'm going to Bahia then, because everything shut down in Sao Paulo. Everything opened up in Bahia. That was in 2015. And I've been here since.
That's when you were working with those little angels at the school. I think I remember that now. Those kids that you love to death.
Yes, I loved my kitties.
So I had forgotten about that. Are you still working at the school?
I am not. In 2018, I decided I just wanted to be an artist. So I left. I was at 2 different schools. So I was at Gurilandia 2015, and then Concept School 2016, 17, 18.
Cool. And let me ask you now, Miss Sanders.
Yeah.
About Salvador, because you've been there for a very long time, and
it's a hot minute.
Yes, you are Miss Salvador. And you did mention to me before that you've been there so long that things are just kind of like, okay, they don't stand out as much anymore. But if you had to think about, let's say, 3 things that really stand out to you, like that make you love this place, and maybe something that maybe someone wanting to travel to Salvador might want to see or do, what would these things be?
I think my heart here is just the sea, the ocean. I'm a daughter of Iemanjá, which is the Yoruban goddess of the sea. And, I live 2 blocks away from the ocean. So to me, the beaches, the ocean here is just spectacular. It's just gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And I need to have that connection. It's like I can hear the ocean from my window. Like I need that. So if you're a water person, Salvador is a place. Anywhere you go, there's water. There's ocean on one end. Salvador is a peninsula, so there's ocean on one end, and then there's the bay on the other end. Trying to think back to what most impressed me, but see, I don't know if it's the same now. I think the culture, if you're African American wanting to move to Salvador, it's quite enchanting to be in a place that has preserved more of its African roots. It's not Africa, but there's more connection than we have in the States because more Africans came here and it was direct, like it's faster to get to Nigeria and Benin than it is to get to Miami from here. Mm-hmm. So to see, I almost feel like, imagine you were given up for adoption when you were two. You're not going to really remember your mother.
Hey,
But
I
if you have
was given up for adoption when I was 2.
there you go.
But yes, and
So,
I don't remember my mother
do
at
you
all.
have an older brother or sister
Yes.
that was adopted as well?
No. Just older brothers and sisters that were my adopted brothers and sisters.
So imagine that before you came back and met your parents, you got to meet one of the older brothers and sisters, and maybe that's what happened.
Hmm.
So you get information about where you're from, that's more than what you were able to retain. And I
Yes.
feel like Salvador is that way. You know, it's not Africa. People have this thing, it's Africa and America. No, it's not Africa. But it's the older sister who remembers more of mother
Hmm.
than we do. Because we were the ones who were African Americans, we were given up for adoption at 2. Well, not really adoption, but Brazil's maybe like the teenager. So she remembers the way mama cooked. She remembers the way mama spoke. In fact, there are linguists here, I forgot what university here, that say that the difference between Portuguese in Brazil and Portuguese in Portugal is the influences of the African languages, in particular in Bahia, the Yoruban language. That there are, like, linguists know these things, but there are ways that we pronounce things that you can take back. You can see these are connected to the languages of the Africans who were enslaved here. So it's, I think for Black people who are moving here, like, that's what you can expect of Bahia, getting to know a little bit more about where our ancestors came from before you go to Africa. Because when Americans go to Africa, we're not seen as, oh, you're coming home. We've been away for too long. We are culturally Americans. And this is the other thing I think that you have to remember, because I think sometimes we'll go to these places where there are African descendants, or go to Africa and think, I'm home, everyone's going to recognize. No, you're American, baby. You speak English, your culture, your expectations, where you've been raised, you're American. Like, African American doesn't exist outside of America. You're just American.
Hmm.
But here, you can, not that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was embraced in Africa, but it came also down to this thing of, I go in there not being like, I'm an American.
Yeah.
But I think you can be embraced here in Bahia in a way where it's maybe the connection is a little easier.
Yeah, because they've been through the same journey.
Yeah.
It's just like you said. Well, one, there were way more slaves brought to Brazil than the U.S. I think there's 4 million that came just to Brazil.
Right.
So they were able to hold on to the culture a lot more. And
Mhm.
and though there were some prohibitions, like there were in the States, Brazil, for those that have never been here, Brazil's like a loosey goosey type of country where it's like, don't do that, but at the same time, it's like, don't do that, or maybe just don't let me see you do that. So
Right?
so they were able to hold on to a lot more things than in the US, when they said don't do that, like, you are not going to hold on to any part of your culture from Africa. In America, it was, yes, you're not going to do that. It
Yeah.
was a lot stricter. So here it's this blend of stuff that's 100% like, wow, this is not from this side of the world, with
Mhm.
this is stuff from this side of the world. And even if you get into the religion, that's a whole other topic, the mixing of the Catholic religion with the African religion and everything that goes
Mhm.
on. So
Mhm.
I appreciate that about. I've actually, you asked me earlier if I've ever been to Bahia. I haven't, and I need to visit you at some point.
Dude,
So I need money. I'm poor. So
just buy your plane ticket. I'll take
yes.
care of everything else. You got a
Um,
free place to stay.
but I'll definitely. But I did meet so many Baianos here. They were actually the first group of people that I met, and when we went to Brasilia together with like 100 of them, it was
Wow.
it was crazy. It's a
Nice.
little thing I was doing at the time, and it was just, yeah, it was love at first sight. It was just this connection, this bond that I had with them, and then I meet this other Baiana, Alisa, and I'm like, oh, she's not really Baiana.
Falsa Baiana.
Yeah, she's a falsa Bahia. Which is a
There's a
great song, by
song,
the way,
but
right?
yeah. Baiana
So,
fica na roda e fica para.
yeah. Yeah, you definitely feel this connection right away. And what's like your number one thing that you like? It's just like Salvador is this,
God,
for
I
you.
so go off on a tangent. I'm a really bad interviewee. Um, oh gosh, it's not a thing. It's my friends, the people that I love here and the experiences that I have. Like I'm a traveler even when I'm here. So like I just took a trip with a good friend of mine to the countryside. We rented a car and I got to drive stick shift again, yay. And just discovering all of these amazing places because there's an area called the Recôncavo. So
Is
if you
this
leave
that
Salvador,
video that you produced? Because I watched this video where you traveled all the way like into the interior.
dude, can I plug that?
Of course,
Can I
no, I'm gonna
plug my
get you to
web
plug
series?
a whole lot of things towards the end of the interview. There will be plugging. Don't worry.
So yeah, so the Recôncavo was in that series that wherever there's music with the Ethiopian musician who came.
It's
But there's all these
wherever there's music, right? That's the name.
wherever there's music,
Yeah, guys,
yes.
I'm gonna link all this stuff. And by the way, because I don't like to do like too much plugging during the interview, but if you see there on the screen, we have Alisa's Patreon, patreon.com slash Alissa Sanders. We got her Instagram.com slash Alissa Sanders underscore, I guess, music. And then we have Facebook.com Alissa Music. I'll link all of those in the description of the video so it's easy for you to just press a button and go to these pages. And I'll even maybe, no, not maybe, I'll put links to some of your music also in the video.
Okay,
So
thank
we'll
you.
get all that stuff out there.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I cut you off. So you went into the interior, you driving stick shift, feeling all.
Yeah, like when you come, don't restrict yourself to the city. I think sometimes people will just stay in the city, which obviously it's easier. But Bahia, there's what happened was there's an area called the Recôncavo. There's the Bahia. Bahia's name comes from the Bahia de Todos os Santos, which means All Saints Bay. It's this huge bay that it's like the third largest in Brazil. And so this is one reason that made Salvador such an important city, because the lands that surround this bay, it's like about a 200-kilometer crescent, are called the Recôncavo. And they're these really fertile farmlands that are like interwoven with rivers. And that's where the plantations were, because it's great farmland, you had rivers to get things to the bay, to then ship them to Europe or wherever. So the culture of Salvador actually comes from that region, because that's where the slaves were. And so samba comes from the Recôncavo, which is not the samba of Rio. The samba of Rio comes from Bahia, from Bahian migrants that moved to Rio. Samba was born, and I know the Cariocas will, but there's proof. Samba was born in the Recôncavo on the plantations. And each little town that you go to has a particular kind of culture, which I'm learning a lot through this web series, because I'm going to the Recôncavo to learn samba de roda from the elders. And each town has their particular rhythm, their way of, doing the samba miudinho. It's fascinating. So there's like these little, like Bahia is not just Salvador. Salvador's the urban part. But if you want to see where the culture of Salvador comes from, you can go to the Recôncavo and really see, because that's where the ancestors came. They came to the Recôncavo.
Yeah, this is so true.
And
This is so true, because when I think of Bahia, obviously I know of Salvador, but I don't think of Bahia as Salvador. I think of it as just this whole state, when I'm just thinking about the place in general and how much of the stuff comes from the interior. And especially because I'm a big, big fan of Maria Bethânia. And she actually has a song, Reconvexo, which she talks about the Recôncavo a little bit, which is written by her brother
yeah,
Caetano. And so
right.
a lot of my knowledge of Bahia to begin came from her and her brother singing about Bahia, and they come from, was it
Santo Amaro.
Santa Amaro? Yeah, this little city of Santa
Mm-hmm.
Amaro, which is in the interior. So that's, I think, even in Brazilian musical culture, what we're getting from Bahia is not coming from Salvador. Salvador just happens to be the big city that most people know, but it all starts inland. And here's a small clip from Alissa Sanders' video series, Wherever There's Music, where she visits the Recôncavo. You can find a link to her YouTube page in the description of this video.
The Recôncavo is a 200 square kilometer region of fertile land that encircles the All Saints Bay, which we call Bahia de Todos os Santos. For over 200 years, large numbers of enslaved Africans were brought here to work on plantations. Recôncavo is the birthplace of samba and some of Brazil's most important African-based traditions.
There's an urban culture too, but like the Recôncavo definitely should not be missed, especially if you're staying here a while. Don't just go to Pelourinho. I mean, you can read in the tourist guides. They're probably a better reference than me for like what's actually happening now for tourists. And when you come, you're going to be a tourist at first. You should be a tourist at first. But then if you're going to stay, leave, go meet some people outside of the city. There's the Chapada Diamantina, which is like, it doesn't look like the Grand Canyon, but it's that sort of place in that it was an inland sea. So there's these crazy rock formations and underground lakes and things.
Yeah, and Bahia
with
is
blind
huge.
fish in them. And like,
Alisa, just to give people
Bahia's
an
the size
idea.
of France.
Yeah, just to give people an idea, the size of Bahia, it's the size of France, you said?
It's the size of France. And the Chapada Diamantina has a particular type of music. It has a particular type of culture and foods. If you go to like along the coast, there's different coasts. There's the Dendê coast with Itacaré, and I forgot the other cities. There's Ilhéus, the coast de Cacau, which is like the chocolate barons. There's Porto Seguro, which was the first places that the Portuguese came, or to the south of Brazil. And each of those places has particular particularities. I don't know if that's a word in English.
Yeah, it has its own particular flavor, which, before we move on to the expat quiz, because we do need to do a little quiz here. We got to test Alisa.
Gonna fail.
You didn't talk at all about food from Bahia, which happens to be something that I think a lot of people connect to Bahia because it's very spicy. It's full of different than the rest of Brazilian food. What do you think of the food there?
I like it, but I've been here a while, so it's kind of like, what do you think of mashed potatoes? They're good.
Oh, I got you.
But yeah, definitely try out the local food. My favorites are, acarajé is for us. It's kind of like, hey, I'm gonna go get some fries at McDonald's. Well, maybe not McDonald's, but like acarajé is like the food. Like you're hungry, you want to eat a little bit, you want a snack, you go get an acarajé, which is imagine a hush puppy, but it's bigger, and it's fried in red palm oil. And then there's things you put inside of it, vatapá caruru. I won't tell you what that is. Come try it. So that sort of stuff, yes.
Yeah, and then in general, the food there's a little bit spicier, and does it have more African influence too?
I think if you're from the South, you're not going to think it's spicier because the whole hot something. But yeah, it's well spiced. It's well spiced. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Does it have a lot of African influence?
Yeah, well, acarajé. If you go to Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, they have something called akara, and it's the same thing, but they don't cut it and put in the vatapá and all that different stuff.
Oh, I got you.
So there's a lot of food, like the traditional Bahian food is very heavily African influenced, but I'm pretty sure there's indigenous influence in it as well. But the ingredients like red palm oil, you find red palm oil all throughout West Africa. And Africans, West Africans who've come here, when they taste food, they're like, oh yeah, this is just like home. So there's definitely like a lot of connections to West African cuisine, but there's also some indigenous influences as well.
I got you. And guys, when I say spicy, yeah, Alisa's right. If you're from the South, you're not going to feel it. But compared to the rest of Brazilian food, which has zero spice, and then if you put like mild hot sauce on something, like most Brazilians are like, oh my God, this is too hot. They complain. Like Taco Bell opened here in Brazil about 4 or 5 years ago.
Tragedy.
And oh, I love Taco Bell. Don't speak ill of Taco Bell. It's the only fast food that I absolutely love. But
Does it?
they put the spice that they put here, the quote unquote spice, it's like nothing. It's like ketchup, And then, but for a Brazilian palate, at least Sao Paulo, if they go anything beyond mild, their mouth is burning. And I'm like, the hottest that you have when they ask me, like, qual calor, qual de pimenta, o mais quente, and I ask for the hottest, and I still can't feel it. So yeah, to an American taste buds, maybe Bahian food is not like, but compared to the rest of Brazil, it's definitely worth it for that because it's definitely spiced a lot better than the rest of Brazilian food. All right, my dear, the time has come.
Dun, dun, dun.
There will be music in this segment.
Oh, no. Gonna fail.
I added in some music after. Because this is the time of the show to find out if Alisa truly knows anything. anything about
nothing.
anything.
Nothing.
No,
Nothing
I'm
at all.
joking with you. The Expat quiz, kind of a lightning round, as lightning as we can go. And I'm just going to ask you some things, and you give me your the first thoughts that come to mind. We're going to begin with one. Now, I'm sorry, before we go on, we're talking all of Brazil now, not just Salvador.
Oh, no. I'm really going to fail.
All right. Those of you listening, if you want to place your bets on whether Alisa will fail miserably or not, do it now. Okay. Number one, what is the best thing about Brazil?
The people.
Why the people?
I don't know, dude. How do I answer that? I think they just have beautiful hearts.
I got you. Number two, what's the worst thing about Brazil?
The politicians.
Yeah. Which are some of the people.
That's true. But only barely human.
Yes.
Many of them.
Number three. Now we're talking all of Brazil, not just Salvador. What's your favorite Brazilian dish or food?
Oh, I'm gonna say bobo de camarão.
What is that? I have no clue.
It's a traditional Bahian food. They take shrimp and I guess you'd call it cassava in the United States. It's that root, that white root, and you cook it and puree that. And then you add all sorts of spices and red palm oil. I don't know what they are. And you mix that in with the shrimps. It's kind of like a mashed, it's not even really like a mash. It's like a pureed root vegetable kind of thing with spice and like big, fat, yummy shrimp. It's so good.
Oh my goodness, I have never had that. I gotta try it. I don't eat too much seafood, but I'll try it. Okay, what? All right. Number four. What is your least favorite Brazilian food or dish?
All right, so when you go to like a por kilo restaurant, like a buffet restaurant,
Yeah.
like if it's not a nice restaurant, they just steam vegetables with no spices and just put them out there as salada. I hate that shit. That's like eating cardboard.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's
Like no
not
salt,
the most
no,
flavorful.
no nothing.
Nah,
Just
they
like
just put it up there and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this?
overcooked random vegetable with no.
Number 5. What's your favorite alcoholic beverage or drink? Could be non-alcoholic if you don't drink.
Yeah, I don't really drink. Okay, so I'm gonna go for a non-alcoholic. Água de coco, coconut water.
Fresh coconut?
Yes.
Yes. It is
Yeah.
delicious. It is delicious. And what, number 6, best place to visit in Brazil?
Oh gosh. Oh, you know, I'm gonna say Bahia.
All right, self-advertise. That's fine. No, I can't wait. You know, so I'm coming. Hold on. I'm coming. Number 7, most overrated thing and place. Most overrated thing. It could be thing or place. You pick one or you can do both. Most overrated.
Oh gosh. Wow. You're not gonna like my answer. No, actually, that's not true. I don't know. Phil, I don't know.
What were you gonna say? Sao Paulo? Because everybody.
Yeah.
That's an answer I get a lot, so it's fine. No, so far, this question is killing me. I've done 3 of these interviews. Brigadeiro, which I love. Sao Paulo with Rod, and now again Sao Paulo. So I might have to change that question.
Brigadeiro, like the street in Sao Paulo?
No, Brigadeiro, like the sweet. Like they just.
Oh, I thought it had to be a place. It could be a thing in
Oh, I'm
Brazil?
sorry. No, I'm thinking least favorite food. Somebody said least favorite food. What was the most overrated that she said? I forgot now. You have to listen because I forgot. But so far, you know, Sao Paulo and Brigadeiros haven't gotten anything. Any love?
Brigadeiros are overrated.
Oh, I know. She said Rio de Janeiro, and I
Oh.
agreed. I agreed with Rio de Janeiro being overrated. I'm not a huge fan.
It was pretty damn beautiful, though, man.
It is. The nature side of it is beautiful. But so let's lock this in. Number 7, you're saying Sao Paulo's overrated?
Yeah.
I'm taking all these links off of this page. Bam.
Sorry, Paulina friends. Okay, I'll switch it to Rio. I know
I'll put all the links there, but only with 1 S.
No. All right, can I change my answer?
So, all right. 8, best place to visit in your city. In Salvador.
God, that depends on what you're into.
So what's your favorite? What do you think?
Such a freaking homebody. I love my neighborhood. I love Itapuã. I love it. It's like being in a small town, but you're still in the big city. You're like 15 minutes from the airport. You're a walking distance from the beach. There's a really strong tradition of samba de roda here. I love my neighbors. Like, it really feels like you're in a small town. But, like, I don't know if that's interesting for people to visit. I know, the lower city. Because everyone comes to Salvador and they go to Baja, which I think Baja is very overrated. Okay, can I switch Sao Paulo for Baja? Baja.
There you go.
Overrated. Everyone comes and they'll go to Baja, the tourist circuit. They'll go to Rio Vermelho, which is kind of a little bohemian neighborhood. They'll go to Pelourinho, and they skip the lower city. Salvador has 2 levels. So there's the higher city, and then the lower city is on the bay side. And there's some really lovely places like Ribeira, Humaitá, Bonfim, which is the famous church that they have the washing of the steps every year. The lower city is spectacular, and I think people from abroad don't visit it as much.
Cool.
And São Tomé, which is also in the lower, it's like in the periferia, Paripe. It was the summer residence of, I don't know if it was the king, some sort of royals from Portugal. It was their summer residence, and it's at the very northwestern end of Salvador.
If you have any pictures of these places, if you want to share them, I can put them on the video as you're talking about it. So share that with me. And number 9, best artist or band. Your favorite.
Here.
No, it could be in Brazil, just in general.
Because I was going to plug my band. Yeah. Chigana Santana. He's my favorite right now.
What's his name?
He's in Chigana. Chigana Santana.
And what type of music is that? I've never heard of him.
Gosh, he's Bahian, but he sings in like 5 different languages. From what I understand, he was raised to be a diplomat, but his love is music, so he became a musician. And he's kind of like, imagine getting to see Milton as a young man, like in his Clube da Esquina phase, but he's Baiano.
Nice. All right, I'll check him out.
Yeah.
And last question, number 10. What would be your biggest warning or advice to expats coming to Brazil in general or to Salvador? You pick.
Okay, I'm going to do it in general. Don't come here and only stay with expats. You will not experience Brazil. Understand that like most, I'm going to say 90% of expats here are living lives of the elite, which doesn't necessarily feel like that to them because sometimes they're living at the same level that they were in the States, but that's elite for Brazil and for most of the world. So if you stay in expat circles, and I'm not blaming expats, it's much easier. But if you just stay in expat circles and go where expats go and only make friends, even making friends with Brazilians through expats, you're still mostly meeting the elite, and you're going to miss out on a huge segment of the culture. And you're not going to meet 90% of the population. But in order for you to be able to venture out beyond expat groups, you have to learn the language because most Brazilians don't speak English. So I would just say move out of your comfort zone, learn the language, and then really step out into the Brazil beyond the expat community because that's when you'll really be living in Brazil. That's when you'll really see the culture. And when you do that, try not to do so much comparison between how things are done in the States or Europe or wherever you're from and how it's done here. Try to come in as a learner, as like really with humility and just like, okay, let me see how they do it. And then decide, well, that works for me or that doesn't. But if you can come into, the regular Brazilian population with that sort of attitude, you will be well embraced. Doors will open to you for things and experiences beyond your wildest imagination.
Cool. I like this. Okay, well, Alisa, is there anything you want to plug?
Yes. Please, if you're curious about seeing what it would be like for someone who knows nothing about Bahia to just be drop smack in the middle of Bahia, check out my web series. We've got 2 episodes. I'm working on number 3. It's called Wherever There Is Music, and I'll send you the link. And it was an experiment I did last year with a musician I met in Ethiopia, who I invited to come to Salvador, because we wanted to do an experiment of saying, well, what would happen bringing someone from a totally different culture to this culture? Would they be able to relate, be able to make music together? And so the first two parts of the series were really about, well, if he's going to come here and make music, he's got to learn the culture and the music. So we go to Pelourinho, we go to São Joaquim, we go to the lower city, we go to around my neighborhood. And the second episode is the Recôncavo. So you see a little bit about the music of the Recôncavo and what it looks like. We talk about samba de roda. We talk about a lot of different things that pertain to the Recôncavo culture. You see some of the food. So yeah, if you're curious about, what it might be like for you, check that out.
I watched both of the videos and they're really cool, guys, because you get to see beyond just what's on postcards. And I mean, she goes deep. I love it when you do like the little Indiana Jones type map where you're just going and going and going and going. You're like, where the hell is Alisa going?
Right.
Where's this girl going? And guys, really cool. And that Ethiopian musician, oh my goodness. I'm not going to say anything other than that. Okay.
That's a whole other conversation, but
uh, but very cool series, and you get a little bit of both worlds because he brings his culture, he brings his Ethiopian music, which I knew zero about. It was so cool when you were explaining how they only have, was it 5 tones do they work in instead of
pentatonic,
7?
yeah.
Yeah, and so you get a little bit of that because he comes over with his Ethiopian instrument, and then
Cinco,
what's the name of it?
cinco,
Unko,
cinco,
asinko.
cinco.
Masinko.
Mhm, mhm.
And but then you get the Brazilians, because he meets these Brazilians and they're showing their traditional instruments, and it's a cool series. So definitely check that out. I'll link that, and I will link Alisa's Patreon page, which you can see there on the screen, patreon.com/Alissa Sanders, instagram.com/Alissa Sanders_music, and facebook.com/Alissa Music. And she's got a YouTube channel, so I will link that somewhere too, so you can check out some of her music. She's got some videos out there. I love the video of you doing the what was that late night? Well, not late night show. That show on
Ronnie Vaughn?
yeah, don't yes, yeah.
Oh,
That's a
yeah.
really great
Yeah, I
performance.
was back in Sao
Yeah,
Paulo. Thank you.
yeah, that's a really good one.
When
Actually, I think I saw that live. That was like when it was
it was
on.
on TV.
Yeah, it was back in '09 or 10 or '09, '10, '09, 10. Um,
Last decade.
so that I'll see if I can find that stuff, and I'll try to sprinkle in some of these video clips during the interview. So, Alisa, it was great talking to you.
Too.
I
Thank
don't
you
think
so
we've
much for
sat and
inviting me.
talked like
It's
this.
been a few
Yeah.
years.
So it was really good, and I learned some stuff about you I didn't know.
Thank you.
But I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface.
For sure. It's been a long life. Oh, how cool. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope that, this will help people who are thinking about moving here. I hope in some way my experience can help illuminate their ideas about what to expect. And I mean, everyone's experience is different, but I think it's helpful to hear experiences of people who've done it. So, yeah.
And done it well, and for a very long time. I mean, altogether, how many years are you in Brazil?
Ooh, let's see.
I'm doing the math here. I'm terrible at math. I got
Think,
you 96?
yeah. And what so it's what 24 years, but for a year and a half I moved back to the US, so I'm gonna say like 22,
Okay.
23 years. Yeah,
But
so
you
most of
were,
my adult life.
yeah, but you were there, but still had a leg here in a way. So we
No, there
won't.
was a year and a half where I was gone, You maybe didn't know that.
No, I do. I
2011,
remember.
2012.
I
Because I
remember.
would fly back for shows, but I didn't have I was officially US resident again for that year and a half.
I got you. All right, my
So,
dear. It was
all
good
right.
seeing you or
You
talking to you.
too. You
And
too.
I'll talk to you soon, guys out there. Thanks
Great.
for listening. Make
Yes, thank you
sure,
for listening. Listen
yeah,
to more music, more Brazilian music, people.
definitely.
Let's
And
do another one about Brazilian music.
I will with you, and I may be able to get another person on that you may really appreciate who knows so much about Brazilian music. I'm impressed with his knowledge of Brazilian music. So I've been talking to him about doing an episode just on Brazilian music, and I'll see if we
Woohoo.
can get all three of us going at the same time. But
Give
yes,
me.
we're definitely going to explore. That's like the deep cuts, you know?
Gotcha.
This is the general cuts, just to get people kind of warmed up. But we'll get some deep cut stuff in there where we really dig into Brazilian culture for the advanced expat. Because
I love it.
no, because there's so much to go into. There's so much when you get into Brazil. It's incredible how deep the culture is. Like
Mm-hmm.
any country, I guess. I mean, you go to any country, even America, if you think about it, you get the what you see on TV that's shown to the world, your Avengers and your McDonald's and your achy breaky hearts. But
Mm-hmm.
but that's not America. I mean, you can dig into the culture and you realize, oh my God, there's so much that's deep and rootsy
Right.
and anything and all that stuff, that's beyond Beyonce, let's say. Not, nothing against
Right.
that, that's cool too. So every culture has that. I don't think sometimes as expats we think about that though, because we're only
Mm-hmm.
thinking about that within our own culture and not realizing, yeah, but this other culture runs that deep too. And Brazil runs
Mm-hmm.
super deep,
Woo.
right? So
I went to
cool.
Recife for the first time. Have you been? Yeah, well, your family's from Pernambuco. Have
Yes.
you spent time in Pernambuco?
I haven't been north of Vitória Espírito Santos. That's the furthest north I've
You
been.
must go because, like, that's a whole, that's an hour flight away from Bahia, and it's totally different.
Oh yeah.
It's like, whoa, like, I've been here 22, 23 years, and it's like, I never knew this existed. So yeah, like when you do come, take the time to travel around, like this for people coming in, because Brazil's many Brazils in one, just like you were saying about the U.S. It's fascinating. I mean, you
Yes, it
could
is
just stay here a
fascinating.
whole life and just keep learning more and more about
Exactly.
Brazil.
And by the size of it, so yeah, you do get that thing with the US too, where from the north of Brazil all the way to the southern tip, man, oh man, you are getting like 100 countries in between.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's so much. Okay,
All right,
guys,
darling.
until next time, thank you so much. Alisa, stay on, but
I
everybody
will.
else,
Thank you,
adios.
everyone, and be sure to share this with your friends so everyone can hear, and not just this one, all of the ones in this series. Let's get good media out there, media from the people to the people.
Look at you. You're too much. All right, guys. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Brazil Expat Journal, the BJ you can trust. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and hit the little bell on this YouTube page or on whatever page you may be listening to this right now. And if you want to support this show, please consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/PhilRay. You'll find a lot more exclusive content there to help you on your expat journey in Brazil. On the next episode, I'll be talking to Sam Lee, an expat from England who has found a sweet home on an island in Rio. He'll talk about what it takes to be self-employed and moving from digital nomad to digital expat. Also, check out some of my other content on this YouTube page. There are movie reviews, ESL lessons, music, and even some UFO footage. Thanks and see you next time.